This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Overall, 2023 was a pretty busy year for me. I painted a ton of miniatures, built a whole bunch of terrain, did some painting experiments and tests, and while most years I produce about 20 videos on this channel, this year I managed to finish almost 30 videos. So today, I'd like to sit back, have a bit of a long, rambling kind of end-of-year video, and mainly I would like to talk about a few big lessons that I learned this year that led to higher levels of productivity and a sort of greater happiness overall with the state of my hobby life. And to start out, let's talk about Hobbystreak. Earlier this year, right around March, I stopped doing Hobbystreak, which I think was taking up a lot more of my time, attention, and energy than I suspected while I was doing it. And if you're somehow not aware of Hobbystreak, it's probably the reason that this YouTube channel exists in the first place. For the uninitiated, Hobbystreak is another one of these sort of hobby challenges, and it's existed in our community in some form or another for several years now. Although I've researched this topic quite a bit, I still haven't been able to find who was the inventor or originator of Hobbystreak, but I remember I learned about it from Rob Hawkins' wonderful hobby blog, which I highly recommend if you've never checked it out. So here's the basic challenge. Make at least 30 minutes of progress towards your hobby every single day. Post your progress on some sort of social media, and then see how many days you can keep this up without missing a day. If you know me, you know I love these sorts of novelty challenges, so I ended up actually doing Hobbystreak for 1,500 days consecutively over several years. In that time, I would say I probably got a lot better at painting. I also started this YouTube channel during that time, but on March 14th this year, I decided to finally end my Hobbystreak, mainly because I found it was no longer really a challenge for me to do 30 minutes of progress towards my hobby every single day. I in some ways had a huge advantage over other people participating in Hobbystreak, as this is my literal job. When I started Hobbystreak, my life was a mess. It was about pulling myself out of depression to just work on something I was passionate about for a little bit of time every day. But these days, I'm in a much better place in my life, and I no longer really struggle with hobby motivation. If anything, the struggle is to stop working on hobby stuff to edit or work on bills or finances or emails or any of the other stuff I have to do to make this a business. So after thinking about it for quite some time, I decided that 1,500 days was going to be a great time to cap off my Hobbystreak and take whatever time I was spending formulating individual posts and photos every day to put that into making video content or making more elaborate projects. Which leads me to the second major change I made this year. I stopped worrying about my pile of shame and focused a little bit more on projects. A few years ago, I made this video called Pile of Shame Golf, the Ultimate Miniature Painting Challenge, which was an attempt to gamify getting through the proverbial pile of shame, the pile of unpainted plastic that many of us hobbyists tend to accrue over time. This was another one of those miniature painting metagames designed to amplify your productivity, sort of like Hobbystreak, but this time inspired by the video game community's concept of backlog golf. The basic idea of this game is that you add 1 point to your total whenever you buy a new miniature, and you subtract a point from your score whenever you finish painting a miniature. You then proceed onward like this, trying to achieve the lowest score possible, like in golf. It encourages you to buy less and paint more. And it was a pretty fun thing to do for a while. We even had different seasons with different bonuses over on the Howl Discord channel, but there was one thing that always bothered me about this way of measuring your own progress. Mainly that speed painting 100 skinks, something that might take you a weekend of dedicated effort, was worth 100 points. and meanwhile spending a ton of time on an intricately detailed model or piece of terrain, at the end of the day, if it was only one model, was only worth 1 point. Of course, we tried to mitigate this with all kinds of extra rules and, again, seasonal bonuses, but it never quite sat right for me, and I think this was the main reason I stopped playing hobby golf altogether. Overall, Pile of Shame Golf is a great, fun game to play with your friends if you're just trying to paint as many miniatures as possible and try to encourage each other to buy less. Meanwhile, the behavior that it encourages is not necessarily conducive to accomplishing other hobby goals besides that. Goals like kit bashing, painting models that are specifically just for display, or building terrain. And slowly, over the past year, I've started using a different productivity system, one that has served me a lot better than hobby golf or Hobbystreak towards accomplishing meaningful progress in my life, both as a hobbyist and as a video creator. And it's really quite simple. Instead of thinking of all of my unpainted miniatures as a pile of shame that I must eventually get through one day and paint every single figure of, I've started to mentally separate the pile of shame into two separate concepts: the store and the project list. Let me explain. A few months ago, I found this really cool retail shelf at a thrift store. It fit perfectly in the empty space on the open wall in my new studio, and after I had it all set up and cleaned off, I started wondering, what should I put on this massive shelf? And when I realized this shelf fit those big GW boxes pretty nicely, I thought it might be fun to create a fake storefront for myself. I really like this idea of creating a fake retail store shelf because I no longer have any hobby stores even remotely close to where I live. Yeah, we're really in the middle of nowhere. I took this concept a little bit further by only putting boxes on this shelf that were either unopened or unfinished projects that I hadn't fully painted. This way, if I'm ever looking for something to paint or even just looking for a specific part for a project, I can quickly and easily browse my own store first before I go online and purchase something. Coincidentally, it also serves as a cool backdrop for any of my more live stream style videos, and it also just really brings my attention to anything I've had for a long time and have done nothing with. In fact, if something sits up there for long enough, I'm considering maybe just putting it up on my online store for sale to start culling things from my collection that I don't really need or want. And while this might seem like a ton of work, as it turns out, making your own online store to sell things is a lot easier than I ever thought it would be. At least it is if you're using this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that I've been using for just over a decade now for all of my website needs. You just pick from one of their fantastically designed pre-made templates, add in any extra pages or widgets you might want, and then customize things to your heart's content using their incredibly intuitive drag and drop grid system. No coding or technical knowledge required. I've been using my own personal Squarespace website for almost 2 years now to house a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my painting reference documents, as well as the aforementioned online store. It's a little bit empty right now, but keep an eye on it as I really do think I will be putting up some of my unpainted miniatures for sale there sometime soon. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. But anyway, like I was saying, I now have this virtual store in my room that I can pick through whenever I'm looking for a spare part or something fun to paint. And when I paint everything in one of these boxes, it then gets transferred back to the set behind me as a sort of little trophy of my accomplishment. My only rule that I've set for myself is that I am not allowed to buy more miniatures if the shelf is already looking pretty cramped and there's not room to put a new project up there. So I'm no longer stressed about any sort of pile of shame. I have my own hobby store now, and I'm not stressed about that. I think it's really cool. So if I don't feel motivated to paint through my pile of shame, what am I motivated to do? Well, this brings us to the second part of this system, projects. So like I said, I no longer think of the stuff I own as a pile of obligations, and instead I think of it as an inventory. Really just a whole bunch of plastic and metal and resin parts that I can use to make projects that are actually meaningful or useful to me, with those words being the key. So how do I define a project? That's a pretty loose term. In this context, I would define a project as any set of tasks that lead to a desirable outcome. One thing that it isn't is basing my decisions on a feeling of obligation based on something I may have bought several years ago. Instead, I am trying to focus these projects on either things I would like to own, or more usually, experiences I would like to have. For example, I want to build a cool kill team board so that I can play kill team with some of the various little kill teams I've painted. I want to paint a tank for my Sisters of Battle so that I can play combat patrol with them. So those are more obvious examples of projects that might be on my project list. But a project can also be something more abstract, like I want to build a gaming table for the basement. I want to invite Brent over for elaborate paint experiments. I want to test out every paint in this paint line and document it. I want to combine multiple kits to create a diorama. And while this might sound just like a pile of shame, but a little bit more meta, in my opinion, it's more than that. It is a shift in mindset. Instead of thinking about projects in terms of the individual miniatures I want to paint or the armies I want to paint, I am instead thinking about outcomes or experiences I want to bring forth into the world. And the second requirement for something to qualify as a project on this project list is that I have to be able to do it in about a week or less. That's right, everything on this list has to be able to reasonably be done in about 24 hours or less. And if there is a project that I want to complete, maybe an army painting or building a big table full of terrain that I think will take more than a week to complete, I sit down and really think to myself, is this something I really want to commit to? Is this something I really want to spend more than a week of my life focused on? And if it really is, some things are worth that sort of time commitment, I try to break it down into multiple projects that will each be satisfying in and of themselves. And once each of those mini projects is complete, I can stop if I want to. Or if I decide, no, this isn't worth spending multiple weeks of my life devoted to, I ask myself, is there a way I could cut corners to finish this in a single week and have it done to my satisfaction? For an example of the first concept, breaking a large project down into smaller projects, I think the best example of this is the video that I made earlier this month. The MDF Brutalist building that I customized that is maybe my favorite thing I've done this year. You should really go watch that video. It's something I'm really proud of. So link in the description. But to summarize the thought process, my pal Ryan from over at Brutal Cities in Australia sent me a ton of MDF kits, and I was really tempted to build them all at once and try to build a city really quickly and really efficiently. And while that sounds cool, there's no way I'm actually going to be able to do that. After doing this for a while, I feel like I know the pace at which I work. I document the time that it takes me to do everything pretty rigorously. I highly recommend that habit. And knowing myself really well and taking some time to reflect on it, there's no way I'm going to be able to complete a project that big in that much time. So instead, I decided that a good project would be to just commit to building a single one of these buildings. If I put a lot of time and effort into building just one of these buildings, I thought that would be pretty satisfying and a nice self-contained project, and as it turned out, it really was. And now I feel motivated to do another one, and then maybe another one. But if I for some reason never get around to it, I now have a cool little building that looks good on its own. And that feeling of having finished something is really motivating and sustaining for me. For me, this is all about setting realistic expectations of what I can maybe do in a week's time and just approaching life 1 week at a time, one project at a time. I also try to keep this project list to under 25 projects at all times, inspired by World of Warcraft. But what if I don't want to break a project down into smaller projects? What if I realize I'm not willing to put more than a week of my life into this experience, this project? In those circumstances, I usually try to find a way that I can get it done by skipping steps or by finding speed painting tricks to get it done in that single week. And for an example of this, I would direct you to my recent video where I painted up the entire Marvel Crisis Protocol starter set in a single week. So for that example, I've been getting really into Marvel comics this year. There's a lot of really good recent Marvel comics, and they have an app which is really affordable. Anyway, that's a whole tangent. I could probably make a whole video about that. But anyway, I've been getting really into Marvel comics this year, and so of course I want to play the Marvel miniatures game Marvel Crisis Protocol because it's also supposed to be really good. So when Atomic Mass Games sent me over the new starter set, thank you very much, Atomic Mass Games, for sending me that, by the way, I was extremely tempted to paint each piece of terrain separately, as they're all really great sculpts that I could easily put 10 hours into each one. But when I sat back and reflected on it in this sort of new project mindset, I realized I don't want to spend more than a week of my life painting this set. The most important thing for me was to just get the whole starter set painted in a reasonable amount of time, so if an opportunity does come up where someone wants to play the game, I can say, oh, I have the entire set painted on this shelf here, let's set it up and we can play. So by thinking about my motivations ahead of time, I realized it was okay to just speed paint this entire box and get it over with, get it all done in a single week, have a lot of fun with it, but not fuss with it too much. And because I had thought about it critically ahead of time, it ended up being one of the most fun projects I did this year, and a really fun video, I think, as well. And now that that whole set is completed, none of the individual miniatures maybe look that great, but as a set, I think it looks really satisfying. So by thinking about this critically ahead of time, it's almost like I'm thinking about this entire box as a single painting canvas, rather than thinking about each individual figure inside as its own painting canvas, if that makes sense. Painting the whole thing in a single week was a really great feeling, and I got that rush that you get when you finish something really quickly. And I gave myself permission to touch up the miniatures after the fact, but I don't actually feel that motivated to do so. It's a complete set, it's on the shelf, it's done. Let's move on to the next project. So to summarize this new system, I have a store that I can buy things from. I don't really have to use money to do so, but you get the idea. And I have a list of projects that I think critically about before I make commitments to starting or finishing something. Of course, I've always known this stuff in theory. Finishing things is good. Break things down into smaller steps. Not every miniature has to be perfect, and I don't have to paint everything I buy. These are all things we all know and we've all probably heard in multiple videos. But I feel like for me, I need to change up my productivity systems every once in a while. I need that novelty of a new system in order to motivate myself to do new projects. And this is my current system, if you were curious. So hopefully that's helpful to some of you, or at least you had fun listening to me talk about it. Beyond that, this would be the part in the video where I would probably typically tell you about what my new resolutions are for 2024. Maybe show you some of this new project list so that you can have something to anticipate. And well, that might work for some people, and I feel like I have to keep relearning this lesson. I have found that historically, telling people what my goals are, what my projects are, is the fastest way to guarantee I'm not going to actually finish them. This is probably the reason why I haven't made any more progress on my Star Wars Shatterpoint figures, or why I still haven't posted the first episode of my D&D actual play series. For me personally, saying my goals out loud is just the surest way to make sure they're never gonna get done. I've always been like this. I'm not exactly sure why, it's just the way I am, and I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm doing any sort of new projects. So I would say my new goals and resolutions for 2024 are to not announce any big projects, doing projects that'll take a week or less to do, one at a time, and see how it goes. So sorry for that anticlimax, but I think that's a much healthier approach to this channel for me. I will continue to make videos for the channel into 2024. I will continue to organize things into more manageable projects. And that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this more rambly video for the end of the year. I just wanted to sort of touch base with you, the viewer, and let you know where I'm at, as well as some interesting discoveries that I've made about productivity in the miniature painting space this year. If you're still watching, thank you so much for watching all the way through this video, and thank you so much for watching the channel this year. Thanks for sticking with me. I know the channel's been a little bit experimental this year. I've been making a lot of different sorts of videos than I usually make. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for still watching and supporting me through all of these strange experiments. I would also like to thank all of the sponsors that sponsored the channel this year. I know it's not fun to talk about sponsors, but it's really the only way that I'm able to make a living at this, is to have regular sponsors on the videos, and I feel like I've got a nice group of sponsors right now who I'm happy with promoting because I genuinely feel good about the products that they're making. So thank you so much to Squarespace, Dungeons and Lasers, Cardboard Dynamo, Hero Forge, Ravage Star, and Mini Wargaming, as well as anyone else I'm possibly forgetting. And in addition, I would also like to thank all of you wonderful viewers for sticking with me this year, whether you subscribed or liked or commented or shared the video, or if you're one of my patrons. Thank you so much for your support this year. Like I said, it's been a weird year for the channel. The videos I make have been all over the place in terms of topic as well as editing style, so thank you so much for sticking with me, and I really appreciate the support. And I'd also like to extend a special thank you to all of the wonderful people over on the Howl Corp Discord channel. I'm not always over there as much as I would like, but the community over there I feel like has really grown this year, and it's become a really nice, inclusive, supportive space. So thanks to all of you for just creating that space and being really cool. And that's about it. This will probably be my last video this year, as I said. So if I don't see you before then, have a happy holiday, a wonderful new year, and I will see you in 2024. Was that good? Okay, well, as long as ship it, as long as